Hello and welcome to Las Vegas for continuing coverage of the $100,000 Mixed Game Super High Roller Bowl. We've reached the final table of 5. I'm Alex Livingston here inside our studio at the Aria Resort and Casino alongside three-time bracelet winner Chris Death Donkey Vitch.
Hey Alex, after a couple long days, we are here at a very exciting Final 5.
Yeah, it was a long day yesterday, playing from 21 players down to 5, but here we have arrived at the final table of 5. We're playing a 10-game rotation of limit and big bet games. Stud, flop, and draw all covered. You have to be an all-around specialist to win this tournament. 3-day event with 60-minute levels as we take a look at our chip leader, Michael Moncek, also known as Texas Mike, owner of 2 WSOP bracelets, a fearless, aggressive player who's going to be very tough to play against, I believe, with this big chip lead. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly someone who will be completely fearless and going for the win alongside Daniel Negreanu here.
Certainly Daniel, no stranger to big final tables. The most accomplished player at this final table, top 10 in the all-time money list, and no stranger to final tables here inside the studio as well. We see Glaser and Yuri Dzivielevski, all-around mixed game players in second and third position, and Chad Eveslage, an all-around poker player who's had success both in mixed and in the no-limit hold'em streets. It's going to be a tough final table, and I think it's anybody's game.
Yeah.
The PLO version, the inaugural one, was of course won by Jared Blesnick, and the second one won by Seth Davies.
Okay. So Yuri right back to work with a ace-2 offsuit on the button here.
Nice flop for the 9-8 off. A couple overs, open-ender. You can see the equities there. A coin flip, but you'd almost rather have Glaser's hand. Much better playability and implied odds.
Yeah, certainly. On the other hand, Yuri does have the value of position here, so we can see how he chooses to proceed in this situation. I could see him going with both a check and a bet here. Suppose he can't take 2 actions at once, so he'll probably choose a check or a bet.
Right. I agree. You can definitely go either way. I think a lot of the time your small pairs and ace highs have some incentive to check back. But if he thinks he's not going to face a huge number of check raises, then there's certainly some merit in just getting some value and protection right away.
And for Benny, obviously not folding, and he is kind of deciding whether or not it makes sense to have this hand into a check raise portion of his range, or whether or not to just play a little bit more straightforwardly, and he does decide to go check raise. I don't think this hand is necessarily over yet, though.
Yeah, it's hard to say how Yuri wants to proceed here. Certainly if he had something like ace-deuce of diamonds with that backdoor flush draw, I think that would be a mandatory continue. Even as is, he has to feel like if he is behind, his outs are very clean. The deuce is perhaps quite a disguised out. Not that there's that many of them left in the deck, but certainly very tempting to call here and see another card where he's ahead of all the draws.
Yeah, one thing I'd be thinking here is that, like, Benny doesn't have that many credible hands, actually. I mean, there's not many 2 pairs that Benny would be defending on this flop, right? Like, the 7-deuce and 6-deuce don't really exist.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem where Yuri has to think, how many bluffs does Benny have? And also, how wide can he go for value? Can he check raise something like Jack-7 for value here?
This looks like a dangerous turn to me for Benny, because he might be tempted to start bluffing with this hand, and obviously we can see that Yuri now has a powerhouse. If
Benny thinks that Yuri's floating the vast majority of ace highs, which he should, then yes, this card is certainly a good one for Yuri's range. And we see Benny just recognizing that this card is bad for his range, and probably would be employing checks with some stronger hands as well here.
Now, if Yuri comes with a big size here in the turn, can Benny continue with an open-ended straight draw?
I think it's going to depend a lot on the sizing, and it's hard to know, because if Yuri does have a hand that's not ace-X, Benny's 9 or 8 might also be outs.
Yeah, that's a good point.
At the same time, check calling out of position with just 9 high is not a lot of fun.
Yuri actually sets the trap by checking back the turn. And we can see against Benny's actual hand that this might lead to a profitable river situation here.
Yeah, if I'm Benny, I'm at least quite tempted to go for a bluff here.
I would think maybe a small bluff would be totally fine here. From his perspective, it doesn't really look like Yuri has the ace after that check back on the turn. And one obvious straight card has come home with the 4 on the river. So Benny could maybe just make a small bluff size here and try to get Yuri to fold something marginal.
Yeah, Yuri's going to have some float stuff like
Instead, we have a
he does go for a big
bet.
Wow. And this is I think that Benny's options, if he wanted, and Yuri just does call very quickly.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is not going to work, but it will prevent him from getting. He will certainly not get raised either.
Yuri has a hand that can beat value bets, and that's why he called so quickly.
This time it's Texas Mike who jumps on the bait here, so to speak. And I'm wondering how Benny's going to play this situation. His stack is starting to dwindle a little bit, but he has a very reasonable holding here.
And I think a nice open from Texas Mike with 3 connected overcards to the limper. If I'm Benny, I certainly would want to be putting some chips in on this pot. Although, the stack size considerations do make it a little bit interesting, don't they? With Negreanu being shorter than him, the ICM implications.
Yeah, we earlier mentioned that the pay jumps are not particularly substantial for the next couple spots. So I suppose I would not mind taking an aggressive tact here. And notice this is where Yuri's strategy really benefits him. He was able to potentially play a very weak holding, but only risked 20k in chips. And when it went raise re-raise behind him, he was able to step out of the way easily.
Right, and Benny deciding that if he's going to play the hand, he'd rather play it heads up, fold Yuri off of whatever sort of equity he has, and maybe take it against Texas Mike, who he potentially thinks could be stepping a little bit out of line.
So notice that Texas Mike has the 9 of spades in the hole. This is definitely going through his mind as he thinks about what sort of hands Benny Glaser would 2-bet him with. He's probably giving Benny a lot of credit for a lot of medium to big pocket pairs, given that he blocks one of the 9s.
Right, and though not a good street, with the 2 overs to Benny's door card, and the pot starting to get a little bit bigger, Texas Mike feels compelled to see another one.
Yes, and Benny has to be very comfortable with the situation as Texas Mike's board has not gotten scary in any way, and Benny's board has gotten scary, and he's improved to the point that he also now has a gut shot draw, right?
Yeah.
So I think Benny's going to be very comfortable betting here, and it looks like in this situation this should be enough to win the pot.
Typically in stud, when you have a hand that you're not sure if you want to bet on 5th Street unimproved, then you pick up any bit of extra equity, it sways it into being an easy bet. Not to mention that he's staring at the Queen Deuce 5 Rainbow, a very non-threatening board from Texas Mike. This is a little bit loose.
This is a misstep. I believe that Texas Mike is sort of just trying to employ that idea that we talked about earlier, which is you just need to be kind of stubborn and optimistic in limit pots. But he is looking at a pretty connected and scary board from a range that 2-bet him. He does not have a lot of equity in that situation. He has, however, picked up a gut shot draw now on 6th Street.
Yeah, that's a very loose continue from Texas Mike on 5th Street. Has to be thinking that he can potentially bluff this hand later on if you're only calling that hand just to improve. Certainly too weak of a hand, but perhaps he thinks he can apply some pressure to Benny later in the hand. And we do see Benny check back 6. Now, interesting to see if Texas Mike takes this opportunity to run a bluff on 7th Street.
It doesn't totally surprise me that, yeah, I would like to see Mike bluff the river here. It doesn't really surprise me that Benny checked back on 6 because he thought he was going to win it on 5th very often. When Texas Mike continued, Benny has to start to believe that he has some sort of a real hand. Yeah, I like this bluff.
I like this bluff too, and this is very interesting from Benny's perspective because, like you mentioned, Chris, we expect Texas Mike to fold a lot of those King, Queen 9, Queen Jack 10, Queen Jack 9, which are some of his weakest continues, as well as the 3 flushes. So when he calls 5th, he kind of has to have something. This is all going through Benny's mind here.
This is a tough spot for Benny, not only from just the stud point of the hand, because he's built a big pot and he has only 1 pair now, but also from a tournament consideration, right? I mean, look at his chip stack and look at the pot. If he wins this pot, he will have a very healthy 1.4, 1.5 million. If he folds incorrectly here, he will be quite shallow.
So what can Benny beat here? Can he beat some Ace-3, Ace-4 that made a gutter somehow? Can he beat some 3-4 of spades that turned that open-ender?
Maybe some sort of a small pocket pair turning
small pocket pair, but that hand has to also decide it doesn't have enough showdown value to just check. Maybe something like pocket 6s.
Right.
This is all going through.
Wow.
Oh, and he does make the fold, and what a play from Texas Mike, who, after making a very loose peel on 5th Street, makes a very nice bluff on 7th.
But shallow, you typically, you kind of know what to do with your money with a Pat 10.
I agree with that. Sometimes you have decisions where you don't know if you actually need to break off that 10.
Ooh, we may have a collision here. It would be very tempting for Benny to shove this hand all in to semi-bluff.
Yeah, I think it's actually the standard playoff of just 19 big blinds. He's now the shortest stack, no ICM pressure. Yuri's going to be opening wide in the cutoff, and he's kind of just unfortunately run into it here because Yuri's going to have a hand that he has to call and pat with.
Yeah, I think, and actually Chad also has a little bit of a tempting hand, but facing a raise and a re-raise, we can see that this hand is going to hit the muck. Yuri is definitely going to call, and his hand would only be a difficult decision if Benny pats in front of him. He might give some consideration to breaking the 10 and drawing for the smoother hand.
I
but
agree.
I think once he calls and sees that Benny's drawing, then obviously he's going to be a favorite with his pat 10.
And I think in that spot you probably still pat behind Chris, but it's difficult.
It is quite difficult to decide, yeah.
Certainly you would pat behind your 10-8s.
Benny is all in for his tournament life and is going to have something like 36, 38% equity in the situation.
Yeah, Benny needing to catch a 4, 6, 7, 9, or 10 to stay in the tournament. Otherwise, he will be our 5th place finisher.
10's good for you.
10 seconds.
Notice that Chad Eveslage did have a lot of blockers to what Benny
He
had.
certainly
in
did.
the
He had,
blind.
I believe, 9, 9, 7, 4 in his hand.
Right.
Time extension.
It's a pivotal moment here for Benny Glaser as he awaits his fate.
Absolutely. These are never fun when you know you're behind and have to catch a card.
And if Yuri's able to hold up here with his Pat 10, he's going to surge into quite a nice chip lead.
Okay.
Scan it, please.
I can't sweat it before.
You can sweat it
Well, they just want you to put it in the box.
at some point.
I'm just going to turn it over.
No, it's Benny has caught a jack, and he is our 5th place finisher.
Gee, buddy.
And you can see the disappointment on his
Jack
face.
advantage,
Yeah, Benny, really somebody
Oh, I did
who
not go.
loves tournament poker, loves mixed games.
Good luck, guys.
Was obviously very happy to be at this final table, and some disappointment showing on his face as he walks off the studio here.
I had the worst hand imaginable.
It looked like a loose call, but we've seen some play that looks a bit loose from Yuri, and we know that he's very well studied.
All right, as we shift gears over to Limit Hold'em, another old school game, and Yuri has a tempting hand here on the button.
3 bets.
Yeah, in a cash game, this would be I'd say an automatic raise. In a tournament, it feels a little bit maybe more dicey. We think Daniel could be opening a little tighter as the short stack, but I'm not sure.
It's interesting. I think it's kind of borderline in cash as well, but maybe because of the tournament considerations, Yuri feels like he's going to generate tons of fold equity post-flop, as Daniel certainly does not want to get crippled in a Limit Hold'em pot here. Definitely Yuri, we can see him pushing his chip advantage now a little bit.
I know.
And
Right.
this is a board where Yuri may be successful in generating some fold equity. I mean, certainly I think Daniel takes a card off here.
Yeah, he's got the backdoor flush draw with the queen of spades, 2 very good overs. But if the turn breaks off and Yuri keeps firing, I think he might win the pot right here.
And
Something
when
like
you
the 8 of
3-bet
hearts.
When you 3-bet a marginal holding like Queen 9 suited, you have to be willing to barrel.
Right now, is Yuri going to feel comfortable barreling here, getting Negreanu off of his king highs? The problem is that the 5 of hearts brings a gutter to ace high, so ace high is probably not going to fold right away. For instance, if the turn was the 8 of hearts, I think Yuri would have felt better betting than he does here on the 5 of hearts. It also connects with a few straight draws.
I agree. I'd be curious to see. Now, maybe if Yuri's hand was even a little bit worse, he would feel more compelled to bluff here.
Something like 7-8 suited for sure, where he has the additional equity.
Interesting river card. Daniel's hand does not improve, however, his range does. I don't think Daniel's hand makes any sense to bluff with, but if he really thinks through this situation, it's possible he could make a hero call here. I wonder if Yuri will choose to bluff.
Check.
He must feel that Daniel has ace-X very often in this situation.
I think this is a very dicey spot to bluff.
Yeah, it's very well. He is going to go
And
for
he
it
is
here,
going for it.
targeting the exact hand that Daniel has, and maybe even thinking he could get a fold from, maybe a heroic fold from something like 8s.
Right.
I think if Daniel thinks this hand through, it is definitely possible to call with this hand.
Do you think, Chris, if Daniel did have those medium pocket pairs, he might have raised the flop with them, though?
Sure. So maybe Yuri's reading the situation very accurately.
Yeah, he might be putting Negreanu on exactly a lot of king high and queen high, and he loses, of course, to queen jack and queen 10. Both of those offsuit combos may have opened.
This is certainly a courageous bluff from Yuri, a good one, I believe. It would be a great hero call from Daniel Negreanu with the nut no pair.
And the wheels are spinning in Daniel's head. One thing he's trying to think about is how loose is Yuri willing to 3-bet me pre-flop? He needs to come up with a number of combinations of hands that are weaker than king-queen that would have played this way pre-flop. Mostly those are going to be suited hands.
He also might be thinking, will Yuri value bet every ace in this situation? Or would he be worried with something like ace-8?
True.
Daniel does fold and Yuri gets an incredible bluff through.
That was a very cool hand from both of them, and you can see that Negreanu is giving it very serious consideration. Players.
I also think we're now in a situation where Chad is very aware of the tournament, the chip stacks, right? At this point, he has a clear separation from him and Daniel Negreanu, and it would be a very bad result for him to take 4th place without seeing, getting some clarification about how Negreanu's stack is faring.
Yeah, great point. We can see Negreanu does open the queen 9 offsuit, very reasonable.
And gets
And
rewarded. This is a bit of an action flop against the king 10 of
Is
Texas.
very
Mike.
likely going to be an all-in pot for Negreanu. I would think if Moncek decides to fast play his open-ended draw here on the flop.
Which he does. Now, if
Negreanu
I'm
is-
Daniel, I like waiting till the turn to put my money in here.
Yeah, keeping some of Moncek's weaker hands in.
Yeah, I mean he's never going anywhere with top pair, but in this situation you induce a turn barrel from some very weak holdings, and maybe if the turn's an ace you can reevaluate.
Right, I like that too. I like just the idea of continuing in position with a call with most of our range here and then making decisions on the big street. His exact hand he's just never going to get away from.
Negreanu feigning weakness here for sure.
Yeah.
He cannot be that worried about his kicker in this situation.
No, and I think once Moncek bets the turn, if it's a brick, Negreanu's just going to very quickly put the rest of the chips in.
I think that's a good plan. It is not a brick, but it's not a particularly scary card for Daniel either. He really has no reason to think that Moncek would have an ace-king or anything like that.
And we do see that just immediate raise.
And Texas Mike is going to have to call with his open-ended straight.
Negreanu actually in great shape here with 80% equity against Mike's hand.
Yes, absolutely. 1.2 million chip pot. Negreanu all in for his tournament life.
Texas Mike needs an ace 10 or 9 to eliminate Daniel Negreanu. Otherwise, he will double up. And we see one very interested spectator here in Chad Eveslage.
quietly rooting for an ace.
Can't believe I
3 of
won that
clubs.
one. I
Daniel
really thought I
Negreanu
was
does
gonna lose
double
it.
up.
That's like the first time I've been wrong in one of those. I was like trying to, I was having that thought in your head. You're like, don't think you're going to lose. Try not to, but I couldn't help it.
255.
And it didn't matter. I won.
You said yesterday you were going to win the tournament, so you had to win this.
That's exactly right. And then I went back
You
to
literally
that.
have to.
I was like, well, if I'm going to win the tournament, I have to win this hand.
Yeah.
So it all came together at the very end. Wow, I broke the streak. I had the anxiety. I thought it was coming.
Now I've got the anxiety.
Money after potentially. I'm also on the hook for some losing this prop bet to you, as Texas Mike is still in decent spot here in this tournament.
Yeah, I believe I stand to win $20 if Texas Mike can hang on and win the tournament. As we see him raise with a pretty loose holding here, the 9-7 tray.
Yeah, but I think from the small blind, I think this is a reasonable hand to open. And let's see how he handles this situation. I'm not sure how much Badugi experience he has. He should draw 1 card here.
I agree with that. Chad's going to have a lot of hands that are still drawing 2, defending the big blind. Oh, and Mike does elect to draw 2. I would have been okay with that if he had something like a 9-deuce ace where his 2-card draw was very strong. But where the 7-3 is kind of weak anyway, you probably want to draw 3 to a 9.
That's exactly right, Alex. When your upside is limited by the 7 in your hand anyway, you want to be drawing fewer cards.
Having said that, he does improve to a 7-5 tray.
I wonder if Chad will be tempted to fold right away, just preserving his chips in this tournament situation. He understands that his hand is worth something, but no, he's very comfortable in Badugi. Chad has played a ton of this game.
Perhaps,
and I'm sure this is a game where he feels like he's going to be comfortable maneuvering.
Yeah, perhaps if he was up against somebody he perceived as a tighter player or someone who had drawn 1 on the first draw, he might let this go. But given Texas Mike was taking 2,
and Mike does make a Badugi. It's not a particularly strong one, but in this situation, any Badugi can be quite strong.
now Chad, of course, has to get out of the way. He doesn't have a particularly strong draw.
Well, hang on a second, because with his 3-card 10, I wonder if he's thinking he has enough equity to continue trying to draw out against a stronger 1-card draw. He also does have the ability to reduce his hand if he were to catch a small spade on the river.
This is true. It just seems to me a 3-card 10 in this tournament situation with Negreanu being so short would be a very marginal continue.
I agree. I'm just curious to see how he approaches the situation.
And you're right that he does have a lot of experience in these draw games. He could also be considering turning his hand into a bluff raise, which would not work against Moncek's exact
that would
hand.
not be a good choice at this moment. If he does choose to continue, he will be very disappointed to find out that Moncek is pat, as obviously he's hoping he has enough equity against a 1-card draw.
Oh, and he
you are
does go for
correct.
the raise.
He's thinking that this is one of the bottom hands in his range and it's worth value raising. Moncek should find a 3-bet here, I believe, especially after that tank.
Yeah, Moncek padding because he can still beat. Chad could be doing this as a semi-bluff with some draw ones.
And now, is Chad going to bluff or is he going to draw? Because he has 2 options here.
Chad's in a very bad spot now.
He was planning on bluffing, I believe. He was planning on snowing and standing pat, but now he's unsure. He was hoping Moncek was drawing 1.
The fact that Moncek didn't 3-bet on the previous street makes him think that he probably has a weaker Badugi, and Chad correctly draws 1.
If Chad can get there in this hand, he has found a way to potentially win a large pot, but he is in bad shape, and he has missed.
He's whipped, and I don't think he's going to want to bluff after taking an unconventional. You know, trying to bluff twice in the same hand is very dangerous.
For sure, especially against someone who, you know, is pretty much committed to showdown a lot of the time with the Badugi here.
Now, Chris,
King 7-5-3.
a very ambitious play from Chad, but one that might have worked if Moncek were not pat himself.
Yeah, he was very disappointed to find out that he was against the pat hand there. Obviously, targeting the 1-card draw, he would. This is a marginal hand in the cutoff, but I would not mind seeing Texas Mike continue to stay on the gas pedal here, given the short stacks.
Completely fine with this open. I think that Negreanu. Oh, and Negreanu picks up the 9 Badugi right away.
So Texas Mike is going to have a decision here because once Negreanu stands pat, Texas Mike has to be looking at his 10 as a questionable card. I mean, against many, many pat hands, you would like to keep the 10, as most pat hands in Badugi are kings, queens, or jacks.
Chris, you make a good point. The median Badugi is somewhere around a queen 7-5 deuce Badugi.
You did raise, yeah. Oh, well, whatever. I can't imagine. I'm going to put it in. 350.
Of course, if Moncek could see Negreanu's cards, he's going to draw 2, but not knowing that.
We did earlier see Moncek throw away that 9 in a somewhat similar spot, so he may just have the mindset of drawing for the smoother holding, which will actually work in his favor in this exact situation. And he does throw away the
draw
10.
2. So against Daniel's hand, this is absolutely correct.
If Daniel were playing this pot against me, he would have 100% equity, as I would draw dead here.
Unless you...
I guess I could reduce, right?
Yeah.
But Texas Mike is now drawing very live to knock out Daniel Negreanu in 4th place.
Sticking with these.
Again, needing a club.
And as we are seeing from
Sticking
this
with
orbit of
these.
Adugi, it is quite hard to
That's
make
it.
one sometimes.
You need a. Oh, you could catch a 9.
And he does
made
catch a
it.
small
6.
club.
Wow, nice.
Texas Mike has made a 6.
GG, y'all.
And that's a fairly unlikely
Didn't
club
think
here.
I
He
was
only had
gonna
about
lose that
7
one.
outs.
I'm reversing that. I thought I was going to win that one.
Actually less.
And we have lost Daniel Negreanu in 4th place.
No limit hold. Oh, wow. And Michael Moncek has picked up a pair of queens.
In a spot where all the players know he's very aggressive.
And they would have reviewed footage at this point. They would have seen him opening 5 deuce offset. And Chad Eveslage has picked up an ace-jack.
I do not see how Chad is going to not put more chips in the pot with this hand against Michael Moncek's perceived aggression.
I think just moving all in here makes a lot of sense. Moncek is also open to 3x the big blind.
Absolutely. I think Chad could very easily shove here.
It's not quite strong enough to want a 3-bet call. I'd rather just shove this combo. And he does.
And
Oh my
Yuri picks up
goodness.
pocket 9s in the big blind. What is he going to do?
This is a very interesting spot, Chris. Yuri is discounting some of the stronger hands, as those would have 3-bet small.
Don't look now, but this tournament could end on this hand.
You're not
Michael
wrong.
Moncek covers both of his opponents and is not going anywhere with 2 queens.
And Yuri does call, leaving just 1.4 million behind. Moncek goes all in.
And Yuri cannot be happy to hear that.
Oh, folds.
Wow, and Yuri quickly folds, so very good recognition of the situation. Got to give Yuri credit there for saving half of his stack.
Yeah, a lot of players might have just moved in with Yuri's hand. He gave himself an exit, knowing that for
Right.
Moncek to get it in that quickly, it almost has to be a bigger overpair.
Instead of jamming over the top, he decided to just call. And with Moncek jamming behind him, he realized that it had to be a strong hand.
And Chris, despite being behind, what a great result for Chad to get an extra 1.4 million in the pot.
Yeah, he now has an incredible overlay. If he's able to spike an ace or some sort of other strong holding.
Probably not.
Yeah, queen stuff.
If I had a queen, I would have an ace.
I feel like you didn't have an ace. I feel like you didn't have an ace.
Chad
If I had an
Eveslage
ace, it would be ace queen
needs an
because-
ace
Exactly.
I would've jacked.
Exactly.
to overtake the chip lead. Otherwise,
Or
he
ace
will
jack.
be eliminated,
Yeah.
barring some other
Would you?
Jack suited.
run out.
Yeah.
Ace!
Ace right away on the flop, and look at the look of dejection on the face of Michael Moncek.
Yeah, he knew he had him in a bad spot. Chad is 2 cards away from a triple up.
And this pot is for over half the chips in play, Chris, or just under half, I should say.
Yes, Chad will go right into the chip lead if he wins it. If his
Actually,
hand
yeah, it
holds
is
up here.
for just over half the chips in play.
An incredible turn of fortunes here. And Chad is able to do it.
And a triple up for Chad
Had
Eveslage
nines.
with the dead money of Yuri in there.
Oh.
Yuri would have been eliminated in this hand, by the way, and made a great fold to save
If
his
I
last
can.
1.4 million.
Absolutely. Michael Moncek has to be very frustrated to have finally picked up a monster hand, get good action, and instead is now looking at the chip leader on his left. Chad with a small chip lead over Yuri has been quite aggressive today, and he stays on the aggression with the 5-5-7.
Yeah, and Yuri definitely has enough hand to defend. Interesting to see how Chad plays this. Maybe he plays it as a D1 and then a snow, Chris, or a D2 that turns into a snow. It's such a weak draw. He could also play it as a D3. He really has a lot of options.
It's possible. I think so far, whenever we've seen Chad play a draw game hand, he has usually gone for the premium draw, for underlying the hand, and he's continuing that here by drawing 3 to the 5-7.
Yeah, and this makes a lot of sense from just trying to make a good hand perspective. I was thinking if he took less than 3 cards, his incentives might be a little bit more devious, but here he's just going to try to make a hand.
Yeah, it looks like Yuri has bricked, although he has paired his 4.
Given that it went 3-2, it's definitely not an automatic bet. As the player drawing 2, if you don't improve, you often check back.
Correct, and also you notice that Yuri's starting hand was relatively weak, having only the 8-7-4. So
Right,
yeah,
and that some of the stronger draw 2s would have 3-bet anyway.
right. Both players now kind of playing a relatively small pot size in this 2 versus 2 spot on the turn. Sometimes the out-of-position player can sometimes take the lead here of the betting and achieve some fold equity.
Note that Yuri switches that 4 of spades to the 4 of diamonds, not wanting to make a flush.
So it looks to me that Chad is going to bluff this hand.
Yeah, so Chad now, And the fact that he's seen that additional 9 and 10 to start the hand, Chris,
Yeah.
actually helps him in this case because it gives Yuri less pat hands.
Absolutely. Yuri also has some incentives to continue here. Obviously, the pair of 9s is also going to influence his thinking in this hand.
Now, we expect Chad to pat here. I believe no.
Interesting that
Okay.
he decided to bet there with no intention to bluff, more just to try to take it down. I think I would have preferred to see him check if this was his plan.
Yeah, it is an interesting play to think about. He's betting with the option of potentially generating a fold and then just turning his hand into an honest draw. If not, I was expecting him to pat there.
Yuri has made his 9 and will be very comfortable value betting if checked to. And Chad's going to have a difficult decision here. It's very possible that Yuri has made a pair in the situation, would want to bluff. Chad has a good hand to consider a hero call, as he does not have that many of those medium-high cards that people would typically use as bluffs.
So these 2-1 spots are always very, very difficult because you end up with a lot of hands around this strength, Chris. You end up with a lot of medium strength bluff catchers, and you just have to decide, A, can I ever beat value bets? In this case, probably not with the King 7, but if he had something like a Queen 7, certainly a Jack 7, he could beat some value. He just decides there's enough bluffs and that he's high enough up in his range, drawing 2 to this King 7.
Yeah, the way Chad played that hand, he ended up in a pretty difficult to deal with river situation when you're drawing 2 out of position versus a strong player drawing 1. You often have to play that guessing game.
And I've played online, I played some limit single draw, a game I think you've also played, so I was really thinking through some limit single draw concepts in my head there.
Sure. So Yuri picks up another marginal hand and one that maybe has some options. I think the standard with this sort of a hand is to just go for the 4-5-8, though, to try to make a strong holding.
I agree with you.
Yep.
Again, another hand that would be stronger in single draw. Moncek with a fairly weak hand, but totally reasonable to call and take 3 here against a button open.
Absolutely. You
Oh,
cannot
sorry,
overfold.
Yuri open from the small blind, so
Right.
definitely going to call.
Yeah, you don't want to overfold your big blind, particularly against the small blind open. Being in position is quite valuable in all these draw games.
2 and 3.
So far, nothing surprising from either of these players. Two standard starts to the hand. Yuri has improved. He does have the gut shot draw, but having the pair blocker in his hand in a 2 versus 3 situation, I think will compel him to bet for value.
Now, Texas Mike has also improved to a nice 6 draw, although both players have gut shots.
I would like to see Texas Mike just call with this hand. Sometimes players can overrate these draws a little bit.
I agree with that. I think one mistake players make is they think that because the other player drew 2 that they might continue with a lot of those draw 2s, but I think usually when Yuri bets, he's either drawing 1 or pat, and you also leave in a little bit of deceptive value when you make a strong hand here because you can make it look like you have a much weaker draw given you started off drawing 3.
Very true. And one final consideration would be that whenever you have that gut shot straight draw component in your hand, you do typically not mind playing slightly smaller pots. Yuri catches a magical card, but Moncek catches an even better one.
And Chris, I expect this pot to just blow up here as both players are somewhat under-repped.
Absolutely. Will Yuri decide to go for a sneaky check raise?
And
yes,
he does.
He will, and this is going to work well for Mike Moncek, who is probably going to find a way to get all his chips into the middle here, as he only has 3.4 bets remaining.
Right, and there's still 1 draw to go, and this is one of those spots where Yuri's check is really nice because he knows that Moncek's gonna bet here with a lot of much weaker pat hands, and in this case, he's just run into it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Yuri made a good choice here at some frequency with this 8-6, but he is certainly going to pay the maximum here. As soon as he gets 3-bet, if that's what ends up happening, he will be very disappointed because now all of a sudden Moncek is representing a hand that beats this, I think.
Chris, is this a spot where as Moncek you're always just going to 3-bet right away, or are you going to feign a bit of weakness and call, patting back, and then try to get your value later on the final street, given that he only has 375 behind if he makes the call here?
You know, for tournament reasons, this might be a spot where he actually just wants to call down. I know his hand is very powerful, but having that 75,000 chips left over, if you are somehow cold decked by a better hand here, is probably worth keeping behind.
Yes, and now having said that, of course, if Yuri checks, his hand is more than enough hand to value bet.
Yeah, I think Yuri will bet, though. I mean, I think that he feels that he has the best hand.
I would agree with you. Yuri still has a very strong hand here. Moncek can be playing this way with a number of pat 8s and even some pat 9s.
Raise.
And he does go for that last 75 in value.
That's what I think, right?
75 more.
Yeah, so I don't think that Yuri likes his hand anymore, but...
Seven? Seven?
Yep.
And then you have the battle of some weak pat hands at some point as well, which we look at something like this for Texas Mike, which could be either a draw to a 10 or a weak pat jack, depending on how the action goes.
Yeah, these jacks can be very difficult to play as they're complicated hands. Yuri has not much here in the big blind, although his hand does have some of the properties you'd be looking for in a bluffing candidate.
True. I think the only way to play this hand as Yuri perhaps is to 3-bet and snow it, or he could potentially call and draw 3.
I wonder how Texas Mike would react to a 3-bet.
And he does go for this 3-bet.
Yeah, this is a very uncomfortable spot for Texas Mike. I think this 3-bet size is a little too large, by the way, but you know, he's leaving himself a very awkward amount for the river.
Right. Sometimes you do go a little, and Texas is really thinking this over. Sometimes you do go a little larger out of position in no limit deuce, just because you're going to have some marginal pat hands that are very vulnerable against those draw ones, and you just don't mind taking the pot down right away. But perhaps given the stack sizes, this is a little bit on the large side.
So Mike is continuing. I'm really a little just unsure what his plan is in the hand. I believe Yuri's going to stand pat.
Yeah, now if Mike had something like a Jack 9-5-4 deuce or Jack 8-5-4 deuce, this makes a lot more sense where he can pat facing a draw or draw quite often facing a pat.
Super interested to see how Texas Mike views this situation. Because if he pats behind, he's effectively bluffing himself. He does not beat value. He could draw 1 to this 10-5. I believe he was hoping that Yuri was going to draw 1.
I agree, and it's not that compelling of a draw is the problem with breaking the jack off, but at the same time, you only pat hands you beat are snows.
So for what it's worth, if you do think your opponent is bluffing very often here, you can draw and then just call the river anyway.
I would have actually preferred Mike to just move all in pre-flop, Chris,
Yes.
if he was going to choose to continue with his hand.
That would have
because
given him
then
more options.
You can fold your opponent off of some of his snows. You can actually fold your opponent potentially off some weak-made hands, and then you have that option to break or pat depending on what your opponent does.
Okay, so Yuri needs to jam now. He cannot win a showdown. This is a very nerve-wracking situation because if he were to get snapped, he knows he's out of the tournament. I suppose he'll leave a few chips behind. I don't think he's going to go for a small size, and he does just say all in.
He just goes all in. Wow.
And Texas Mike, I do not believe, can call. This would be an insanely heroic call, having paired his 4 on the end. It would have actually been a very interesting spot had Moncek caught a 10 low on the river, as that hand also would not necessarily want to call this spot. Texas Mike seems to believe that Yuri is bluffing in this situation, at least at some frequency. He has not immediately released, and even the fact that he continued pre-flop is telling me that Texas Mike has a non-belief in this hand. Look at him throwing out his time banks, really, really believing that Yuri is capable of having a snow in this situation.
This is wild. Texas Mike, and does he have, Chris, the type of hand that actually looks like it would be very good against the blockers?
He asked how much, so he wants to get a full count. I mean, all hands are sort of equal against a pat snowing range. I mean, yes, it does make some sense that he doesn't have any of the
I think the 8s and 9s are often very featured in those pat ranges, right?
But the way Texas Mike approaches poker, I believe that he just has maybe a good read of the situation. He does seem to play more instinctually than some of the other players at the table, not necessarily using his blockers to make decisions.
Also, Chris, worth noting, the stacks are all so close. This would be for almost all of Texas's Mike's chips as well. So Chad is an extremely interested observer who would like to see a call no matter what the result of the showdown is.
Let's not underrate how impressive of a bluff this is from Yuri. To take this hand and go for it with the 3 chip stacks being as close as they are, this is an incredibly heroic play.
And Texas Mike is not posturing. He is genuinely considering calling Yuri with a pair of 4s.
This could be like the dumbest call of all time, or like the sickest.
Yuri cannot like hearing that.
He is sniffing something out here.
I haven't seen a 6, 7, or 8 yet.
Alex, you called it.
Yeah, he really thinks that those...
I paired.
10 seconds.
If I draw 1, how can you jam? You just started with like a good 8 or 7.
Time extension.
I would be...
Can you jam if I draw 1?
My pulse would be going 200 miles an hour in Yuri's seat.
He's so gangster.
Wow.
And he makes the call.
An incredible hero call from Texas Mike Moncek. Unbelievable. One of the greatest hands I've ever seen of this game.
Yep, good game.
Chris, that's outstanding. And
I cannot believe that just happened.
Mike really showed a lot of high-level concepts in his thought process
Like, Dean's
there.
gonna yell at me forever if this is like the dumbest move ever.
That was amazing.
No,
I'm
you were-
speechless.
you were-
I'm stunned.
That line's almost always a bluff, but I thought Yuri had it that time because Yuri's good enough. You know what I mean? He's good enough to like do it with like if he had a 9, he would do. I think if he had like a good 9, he would do it too. It's like
I got goosebumps for that one. Let's go.
no, a lot of players. Well, that was sick.
Chad definitely enough of a hand to play on the button here.
Right, and just coming in for a small raise.
Having that extra 9, always nice to block your opponent from having strong hands and continues.
Yeah, so in a ring game environment, you would rarely draw to a 3-card 10, but I think this is a totally reasonable play for Moncek.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me for both these players to be drawing 2.
It's just rare that you're going to get a big confrontation as both players are drawing 2 to such weak holdings that it's kind of hard for them to make anything that can really cold deck each other in these sort of situations. And as you see here, it's like a pair of 5s versus a pair of 9s.
Chad probably feeling like he needs to bluff this hand.
Yeah, I think 9s is probably bad enough to bluff.
Although perhaps a little fearful after seeing the call that Moncek made earlier against Yuri's pad hand.
Absolutely, and he goes for a large size. This makes a lot of sense.
I like this.
Building a strategy around making a 9 low and going for a big sizing here.
Right, just like in Hold'em, you want your bluffs to somewhat mimic your value hands. Having 2 9s, a 9 is a value hand that Chad would often have here.
Don't look now, but Texas Mike has not immediately folded his pair of 5s. He does indeed appear to like hero calling.
He might be thinking about the same logic he was thinking about earlier.
Yes.
He hasn't seen any 9s, 8s, 7s, or 6s. Now, he has seen the 10 and the jack, which could be cards that Chad would pair and bluff with.
He has extremely good instincts for these situations, and another good potential hero calling hand, and he's going to make
wow,
it.
He does it again.
Nice.
Pot after pot, Moncek is winning huge no-limit single draw pots with pairs. Deservedly so.
Yeah, and we saw Mike registered the tournament quite late on day 1.
You know the little like all-in EV chart. I'm not sure. Yeah, like you're well below expectation.
Yeah.
You're absolutely ravaging.
And then you couldn't beat Yuri.
I know.
Circle of life.
Yeah.
Moncek with 9-7 again.
I would like to see Chad 3-bet this hand out of the big blind. These zero-gap suited connectors make good 3-betting candidates, so you can hit some surprising board textures.
Definitely a nice 3-bet in a cash game. Perhaps in the tournament situation, just employing a slightly smaller strategy.
Kind of a big flop for both players here. You could even employ some leads here if you were Chad.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. This is the type of board that's going to hit the big blind actually a little harder than the button probably, although both ranges are quite wide in this heads-up situation, Chris.
Absolutely. And Chad improving again by picking up the flush draw.
Is this a spot where you're going to consider a check raise as Chad and perhaps turning this hand into a bluff, or do you think you have enough showdown value with the 6?
I think you have enough showdown value. I also think that Moncek could have gone ahead and bet his hand for value on the turn. I think this was a little bit of a tight check back.
Now, as Chad, do you like going for a check raise or just pursuing value right away?
I think I do kind of like check raising. Your opponent's going to have a nice opportunity to go for a bluff here with the number of missed holdings, and obviously there are a number of straights available. Moncek is actually going for value here with his 2-pair, which is totally reasonable.
Yeah, I think very reasonable, and makes the check from Chad very nice. The thinner your opponent is willing to bet for value, then the more check raising you want to do with some of these strong value hands.
Immediate regret from Mike Moncek here because now he faces a difficult decision. Obviously, he knows his opponent is capable of bluffing. I would be a little bit worried about calling with this hand. I would be thinking I have a number of straights that are better hands to call with than this. He made a thin value bet with one of the weaker hands that he can hold, and his opponent can easily have a straight or a flush here given the action. So I think that this would be an okay situation to go ahead and make a laydown, although we have seen Texas Mike make a number of hero calls already today.
And given that the turn went check-check, the pot's also a little bit smaller. But Texas Mike does end up calling, and I think there's a rule of thumb. Sometimes you feel like because you can also have bluffs, you want to just bet call a lot of your value hands in limit games. But I agree, he's really towards the bottom of his value range in a slightly smaller pot where the turn check through.
Pair and a straight draw.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, you were 9s up.
Yeah.
And we saw the same thing with Yuri, right? Where Yuri was chip leader and then the shortest stack, and then built back up to chip leader again, and then short again, and then busted. So there's been a lot of movement.
Absolutely. It looks like Chad is maybe even employing a trap here with King Jack. I think he would probably want to put in 16 big blinds if needed to.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a hand that he's willing to get all in with, and he just uses a trap. And look at this flop.
He flops the nuts.
Moncek flops a very interesting bluffing combination, potentially, with a double gutter. He does just elect to check call.
Whoa, and Moncek may be up to something here. I guess, okay, so just continue with the double gutter, yeah. A 9 would be a disaster for him.
Yeah, very true.
Chad obviously loving his situation right now, hoping his opponent has a queen.
Chad does go with a big bet here, and kind of an awkward spot for Moncek, but he does make the call with his double gutter. Little tricky spot here, out of position with just jack high, really hoping to river a 9 or a king, although we know the 9 would be no good.
Check.
How heroic does Moncek want to be? In theory, his hand could beat some bluffs.
And well, we've seen him make some pretty big hero calls before, but this would be, I think, almost an even bigger hero call than the pair of fours, Chris.
Yeah, no limit hold'em is not really my game, but I could see him considering it here.
I suppose he's got to figure out how wide can Chad go for value. And is Chad just going to
What's after 08?
randomly bluff with a lot of his small cards?
Thanks.
Yeah, Moncek asking what the next game in the rotation is, perhaps
10 seconds.
considering that in his decision here.
Absolutely, he's getting quite shallow. He's absolutely considering hero calling this jack high, thinking that Chad could have an absolute airball, and he does call.
And he does, wow, and the tournament is over. Chad Eveslage, winner of the inaugural $100,000 mixed game super high roller bowl.
Good game, man.
Yeah, good
Wow.
game, dude.
Well, congratulations to Chad. Texas Mike Moncek put on quite a show here today as well. Live by the sword, die by the sword with those hero calls.
Yeah, trusting his instincts. I mean, the huge call to eliminate Yuri and just trusted those instincts. They were wrong this time as Chad flopped the goods there with Broadway.
There is our inaugural super high roller bowl
Congratulations,
winner.
Chad Eveslage, champion, $1.2 million, and the first ever super high roller bowl champion.
And nothing
for
to be
mixed games.
disappointed about for Michael Moncek. I'm sure he is disappointed, as we know he was playing for the win and the win alone, but an incredible showing,
Thank
a
you.
memorable
Thank you.
hand.
Thanks.
And you can see
Yeah,
Chad finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. As you can see, Chad Eveslage, winner of $1.2 million as he maneuvers this very tough final table. Michael Moncek, runner-up. All credit to him and that absolutely bold bluff. $725,000 for his second place effort. And you see the rest of the final table there. Yuri, Daniel Negreanu, and Benny Glaser. Strong showing for all 5 of those players. As we go back to Chad, champion, showing off some, showing a little emotion now, letting himself smile.
Yeah, look at that ring. Look at that
The
cash.
ring and the cash. And, you know, Chad played great, especially in the draw games. And Chris, I want to thank you for being alongside me for all of this. This was a fantastic experience, and been really a pleasure to cover the first ever Super High Roller Bowl with you.
3 days of incredible poker, getting to see some of these games that we rarely get to see on stream, and it's been a pleasure to be alongside you too, Alex. Thanks very much to everyone for tuning in.
On behalf of Chris Fitch, this is Alex Livingston saying goodbye.